Welcome to the Football Boardroom. This week, we're taking a look at my old club, Chelsea. We're going to get in the boardroom and ask ourselves, who are these guys running and owning this football club? Did they really have a cunning plan? Is it time for a change? What does that mean for the playing staff? What does it mean for the coach? What does it mean for the stadium? We hope you enjoy the show.
Christian, hi, how are you?
Very well.
Let's get straight into Chelsea, because I've been talking to Chelsea fans and there are planned protests before the game against Manchester United on Saturday with some of their colleagues and friends from Strasbourg, also owned by Chelsea's owners, Blueco, and they are protesting against the direction of the club under individuals that I'm sure you know well from the business world. Tell me a little bit about Chelsea's owners.
Well, yes, I think the two people that most of our audience will be familiar with now are Todd Boehly and Behdad Eghbali. Let me tell you a little bit about their backgrounds. Let's start with Todd Boehly, because when the club was bought in the summer of 22, he was very much front and centre in that process. So Todd and three of his associates own about 38% of the club. And Todd's biggest claim to fame in the sporting world, he's a very, very serious financial investor, and he made his name in American sports around the world-famous baseball franchise, the LA Dodgers, where with his mentor, a man called Mark Walter, who is also an equal shareholder at Chelsea, I may note, and who is really the dominant figure at the Dodgers still today. They bought the Dodgers in 2012, and it's been a huge success.
So nothing jammy about the Dodgers?
Nothing jammy about the Dodgers. Quite the opposite, I think. And what's interesting, and I'm going to come back to this when we talk about their strategic plan, but I'd like to leave you with this thought on Todd, that really his genius around that Dodgers story centered on a massive media deal that he did soon after the acquisition, or at the time of the acquisition. They basically bought a bust baseball club and have turned it into a serial winning team. For our UK fans who don't follow American sports, they won the World Series in 24 and 25. They also won it in 20. So 3 World Series is about as good as it gets in baseball. Todd's been in the middle of that with Mark Walter, and Todd's claim to fame was a highly innovative and incredibly lucrative media deal where he sold the rights to the Dodgers to a cable company for $8.5 billion.
Which is presumably the reason why he's gone into Chelsea, which we can get on to.
Yes.
What I'm intrigued about at the moment, because you know these individuals, why would someone like him and Eghbali get together?
Well, that's a crucial question. So the most obvious answer to that question, I certainly get the sense that being in sport already, being an entrepreneur who'd made money in elite sport in America, we've seen plenty of those types be interested in the Premier League. And when Chelsea's put on the block, price talk, this thing's going to be going for £2.5 billion. The simple answer is, I think Todd Boehly needed more firepower, and he looked around for a partner. And he partnered up with a private equity firm called Clearlake Capital, led by Behdad Eghbali. Now, that's a very different profile, actually. Clearlake is an American-based private equity firm. What is a private equity firm? It is a firm that manages investments from major pension funds, major institutions who back Clearlake Capital to invest in companies, buy those companies, hopefully make those companies more valuable and sell them later for profit. That's the classic.
But there's one thing between buying a company, between buying, say, like a ball bearing factory in Wisconsin, and buying into something as complicated, as emotive as an English football club.
You're right.
It's not at Chelsea. Been going for 150 odd years, no less than that. And, they're not a startup. You are going into a world where there's so many moving parts. There's so many vicissitudes. Things change. You've got VAR. You've got a player getting injured. You've got a player falling out with a manager. You've got a manager maybe being inexperienced. It's not something as simple and formal as structured as the world that they were investing in before. Do you think they realised that they were getting into something as complicated as an English football club?
I think your point's really well made. This is definitely, to use the kind of business speak, straying away from the core activity of a private equity firm largely based in the USA, largely investing in technology and software businesses. It's a long way from their core business, and this is going to be key as we unpick what happened next, because I don't think they knew what they were letting themselves in for.
Would you have advised them if they'd come to you and say, the English the English football landscape,
Yeah.
and obviously Chelsea, would you have advised them with their background to get into it if they think they're going to flip it and make a profit?
I've said before to you many times, and even on this show, that do you remember my French professor anecdote? I think football and private equity, football, particularly football and debt, is an explosive cocktail precisely because, as you suggested, you can't actually control the core driver of your success, which is on-field results as a businessman. And when those results don't come through, those financially led structures can become extremely risky really quickly. And I do think there's something in that. There's another, even more fundamental issue from day one here that brought back terrible memories for me from my time getting into the game. You remember, I was a private equity guy with a nice private life in 2008 who was asked to go in on an interim basis, basically to referee a complete breakdown between two men from that world, Tom Hicks and George Gillette, who were the co-owners of Liverpool. And they had fallen out to such an extreme level. They refused to be in the same room together. They refused to talk together. They wouldn't talk to their CEO. They wouldn't talk to their manager. And that was the shit show, that I agreed to get in the middle of in '08. And I've said ever since, and I'll say it again.
You ended up in court, didn't you, with them?
Ultimately, I did, to get rid of them. But the point I'd like to make is that when Todd Boehly found this great opportunity to buy Chelsea Football Club and partnered up with a private equity firm led by Mr. Eghbali, they didn't have 20 years of history as partners, as business associates, through thick and thin. Patience, tolerance for when things go wrong. It was a relatively new coming together, just like Hicks and Gillette. And what I saw at Liverpool all those years ago, all Liverpool fans will remember it well, when things started to go wrong, that relationship broke down. And they're
quite different characters, aren't they? I mean, I met them when they first came in, only very briefly. And Todd Boehly struck me as someone who is sort of slight blue sky thinking, sort of slightly broader perspective. Whereas Eghbali, we were talking, I asked him a very innocent question about the sort of stadium, and Todd passed it on to Eghbali. Eghbali was actually very strong on detail. I was quite impressed by how much...
They're different profiles. You're absolutely right.
But does that then lead to a slight, or the potential of a falling out? You see all these headlines, and I know there were some certainly about sort of 14, 15 months ago, about a fallout between the pair. And as you experienced at Liverpool, that can only be damaging for the club.
Yes, I think there is something in this. These are different profiles. Let's be clear. They are ultimately financiers. They are professional investors who are buying Chelsea for £2.5 billion because they've got a cunning plan to make it worth £10 billion. And we'll talk about that. But on the human side, before we get to how it's gone and where they're trying to go, there are core issues right up front here. The fact they haven't worked together very much, the fact that one is running a private equity firm that has a very specific set of rules, expectations, investors who expect a return, which is a bit different to the way that Todd Boehly would be approaching things. Todd and Mark Walter, whatever it is, 14 years in, still own the Dodgers, still going strong. I suspect they would see themselves as very long-term holders of a very valuable sports franchise, not a private equity firm that needs to see
in and out in 5 years.
Well, in and out, yes. I mean, in a private equity business, you have to get out. It's part of the constitution of any private equity firm.
So there is an inherent tension between the motives of the two of them.
There is. Listen, success is fine, okay? If this club was clearly already well ahead of the plan, well on track
which
to be...
Which it's not.
Well, exactly, and that's the issue. So the sense I have is that after let's face it, a very difficult start for this ownership group very quickly. This is a team that in the 3 years prior to the takeover, I think was fourth and third. That's what they were buying. A Champions League qualifying machine, a trophy-winning machine, and that underpins why someone would go and buy something for £2.5 billion in London and think we can make this worth £10 billion. And lo and behold, their first season at ownership, they finished 12th.
Sorry, £10 billion.
That would be their long-term goal for sure. They're in it to create a hugely valuable business and football club. And the start position was a really successful team in London called Chelsea Football Club. And in their first year, they're 12th. Okay, that wasn't in the script. And when private equity investors back a manager, and in this case backing Todd Bowley, to lead their business plan, and it isn't starting well, standard procedure for a private equity executive like a Bowley's, I've got to get to London, I've got to get involved. I've got to protect my investors' money. It's not his money. He is managing money on behalf of some of the world's biggest pension funds and institutional investors.
So the problems at Chelsea start from the top.
I think the problems that we have today start from a position of a business plan that justified a high-priced acquisition going horribly wrong in the first year of operation.
So CP, do you think we should have some sympathy for Liam Rosenior? Because he's effectively being asked to coach a team but not manage the squad in terms of the players that he wants brought in. And in a way, this is the theme of Chelsea Football Club in this current era, the post-Roman Empire, effectively, is that how many grown-ups are there in the club? How many grown-ups are there in the boardroom giving wise advice? This is a week where we've been mourning the passing of Colin Hutchinson, who Chelsea fans remember just emotionally for what he did to the club, the managing director for 15 years under Ken Bates and Matthew Harding, the players that he brought in, Ruud Gullit, the way he went out and sorted deals and actually helped get, he was like a sporting director, even though he was managing director. He passed away sadly at the weekend. And someone like him, there's no one like him, a grown-up in the boardroom. Is there also, I mean, we could argue there are no grown-ups on the pitch in terms of experienced players, not since Thiago Silva's left, and obviously Reece James is unfortunately injured. And also just coming back to the dugout and Liam Rosenior, in a way, has he got a sort of managerial mentor who can help him? It's almost like a sort of theme running through the club that they actually need a few more older heads giving them advice. But coming back to Liam, he's a good, bright young coach. We've absolutely seen that, the three clubs that he's worked at. But is it an impossible job because of the strictures from on high and the squad that he's been given, which is effectively kids?
Private Equity 101, strategy, people, finance. Nobody knows that more than Ed Barley. I am really surprised that on the people side, this club looks underpowered. The first thing I would have done if I had been Ed Barley and Bowley, day one, would have been to get my management team lined out. Professional chief executive, elite sporting director, elite manager.
Which they don't have.
And Todd basically did the job of the chairman, chief executive, owner, and sporting director initially. They ended up hiring Winstanley from, I think, Brighton and Stuart, I think, from Monaco, both competent recruiters, but not heavyweight sporting directors. You know, go and get a cheeky beggar Reistein out of Man City, you know, a real grown-up. They chose not to do that.
So, CP, we've seen this growing divide, apparently, between these two major characters at the heart of the club. But come on, this is your world. Crunch me the numbers.
Well, it's always the numbers that leads to these rifts and these divides, and the numbers don't look pretty. The club's accounts have just come out for last season, 24-25. They lost about £260 million at the
Premier
Chelsea
League record.
A Premier League record.
Did you get a plaque from Richard Masters for that to stick up on the wall of the club?
I don't think that's
It's not a trophy.
It's not a trophy, that is for sure. It's not the kind of trophy they want, that's for sure. But do you know what's really interesting about that, Henry, is that it drives people like me mad that when I was running football clubs, I'm not a hypocrite. I suppose I took advantage of it. But in the sense, there's such a delay between the release of financial results, and they relate to a world that's long past. So these results, this headline-grabbing record loss of 260 odd million quid, is last year, okay? And they would say, Chelsea would say, sitting here with us right now, oh, no, this year numbers much better. We're in the Champions League. We won the Club World Cup last summer. And so the revenues from those two crucial bits of on-field will mean this year's numbers will be much better.
There's one huge flaw in that.
What's that?
Well, there's not another Club World Cup and they're not going to get back in the Champions League.
That is true. You're getting good at this, mate.
Hanging around you and picking up all the fact that...
Exactly. So headlines for the audience. Turnover under £500 million, miles off their main London rival now is Arsenal, okay? In my time at Chelsea, Arsenal were nowhere near Chelsea, obviously on the field in terms of trophies, in terms of those two acid tests, being right at the top of the Premier League, trying to win it, not just scrape into top four, and going deep in the Champions League. For the whole of the Abramovich era, including my time there, Chelsea were miles ahead. And by the way, Chelsea were ahead on commercial, Chelsea were close on the stadium, and obviously way ahead on the TV money. Now I look at the numbers, and this is the picture that these two key principals, these two owners are looking at, 2, 3, 4 years into the deal. They're doing less than 500 million of turnover when their key rivals are doing 700 million. They're not, and in plain English, they're 6th out of 6 on commercial income in the Big Six. They're 6th out of 6 on stadium income because they don't have a big enough stadium, even though they charge quite a lot of money to go to that stadium. And they're 6th, obviously, on the television income because that's probably where they're going to finish this year. And yet, they're number 3 on wages and they're number 1 on transfer spending. That's a really explosive mix of numbers, Henry, which means that they're losing a lot of money. And yes, this current year, let's add that Club World Cup and Champions League revenue back in. Maybe I'm saying, another 80 million or so on the European side, best case scenario. Maybe 60 to 70 of the club, maybe 150 to 160 more revenue this year. So they lost 260. So maybe this year they only lose 100. Well, you might not get the plaque for the record loss, but nobody's doing flips because they've still lost 100
And they've got
million.
no more loopholes because they've sold the hotel and they've sold the women's team.
Absolutely right. That ship has sailed. And so we're now in a world where it's all about your turnover, and that turnover is going right back down in 26-27 because the crucial Champions League money, probably 80 million this year, that might be 20. I think it was 19 when they won the Conference League. They went the whole way, okay? So a huge difference, and there's no Club World Cup, which was an absolute windfall of revenue.
If I'm a Chelsea fan and I'm listening to you, I'm going to go, this means selling players.
Well, the point being that the wages and the cost of amortising those transfers, that's about a £500 million cost every year for this club. And that needs to be 70% in Europe of their income or 85% in the Premier League. And any which way I look at the numbers, Henry, I'm telling you right now, I can't see that happening next year without either a genius discovery of another loophole, and I don't see that. The mood music is definitely turned against that, which means a big profitable player sale as the only way to comply.
So just on the back of that, pressure on Liam Rosenior to get them back into the Champions League. As we stand, they're 4 points off
6 games.
5th.
Yep.
And they are actually closer to 11th place than they are to 5th. So there is a queue of good, ambitious, well-run, better-run clubs behind them, sort of Bournemouth and teams like that, Brentford, who are desperate to overtake them in that race.
Yep.
And then the problems are very clear. Obviously, they are in the FA Cup semi-final, but that doesn't bring in too much revenue. But they could finish 5th and win the FA Cup, so that is not a sort of a terrible season. But longer term, we are looking at meltdown.
We're looking at a business model where the front loading, this enormous investment in trying to build a winning team, that is what they could absolutely agree on. They both agree it's all about winning. They've spent more than any other club in the last 4 years on acquiring talent to create a winning team. And as we've said, the numbers don't lie. They're their Premier League outcomes are way below the average finishing position in the Roman Empire, and they've got to fix that quickly. And the problem is they're doing it under a set of financial regulations that are going to make life really hard for them, because their natural revenues, Henry, when they're not dominating the Premier League and they're not going deep or even qualifying for the Champions League, their natural revenues are too low to support the costs they have invested in wages and in player amortization. That is the big issue. So just when they need the team to kick on, what I'm saying today in plain English is I see a need to sell more players for big profits. Note profits, not price. If you sell Enzo Fernandez for 100 million and you spent 100 million, that doesn't help your squad cost rule. You need to sell a player who costs nothing for a boatload to generate profit. Last summer, let me just tell you this, there was a lot of noise about record player sales. They raised 300 million in the summer of 2025 selling these players. The profit on that 300 million was barely 30 million because those players were in the books at high numbers. So you don't generate the profit.
You've been in boardrooms. What would you say if players spoke out effectively against the club and the direction of the club, as Cucurella did in a fairly, actually quite measured way in his interview with the Athletic, and Enzo Fernandez in a slightly more militant way in terms of linking himself again to a move to Madrid? If you take a step back, obviously they shouldn't speak out publicly, but actually what they are saying, and is clearly a discussion in the dressing room, is that they have concerns about the direction of the club. And will that make it easier for them to leave?
I think it's such an interesting input because we've talked about this great strategic plan to make Chelsea worth, maybe £10 billion in 10 years' time. And that comes from this idea that if you can buy all the best young players in the world, just never lose out in the race to acquire talent, that if you assemble, the biggest squad of the best young players in the world at 21, 22, by the time they're 25, you're going to have the world champions. You're going to have, the LA Dodgers of football. What those two players are really proving is it doesn't work like that in European football, maybe for three reasons. Firstly, you and I know that the graveyard is littered with expensive 21-year-old signings that didn't quite cut it age 25. That's the first thing. So the hit rate is much lower in football than any other sport, even buying at that late stage. The second point is when you get it right, let's say with someone like a Fernandez or a Caicedo. So yes, they've paid huge transfer fees for those players, by the way. So there isn't a lot of profit in that. But the problem is those players, they demand to be part of a winning team, and they also demand to be paid top dollar. So we're going to have lots of young players on more reasonable salaries with more performance-related pay. The problem is, if you've bought really well and these players become really elite, they go off to international duty and they find out their teammates are earning twice as much money. So what do? They either demand a pay rise, in which case your low-cost model's under pressure, or they demand a move, in which case your team gets worse. And we've just said, throw in the fact that to comply with regulations, you need to generate trading profit. My basic point is that these squads are not stable. And I think that's what those footballers are pointing to.
Yeah, and you look at someone like Estevao, the Brazilian they've got, who's clearly a talent. Will he want to hang around if Real Madrid come calling and he's not in the Champions League and he can see Chelsea drifting?
You know the answer to that question.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a rhetorical question. But what you also find with a player like Estevao, and talking to Chelsea fans about this, there's a connection between him, almost like an emotional connection, even though they love the way he plays, they love the way he comes over at the end of the game and applauds them, gives his shirt to a kid. He's obviously a genuine individual as well as an exceptional, potentially world-class talent. But this issue of connection is huge. And this is one of the huge failings of the two guys at the top, is they really don't have much connection with the fans now. So there's very little patience for them and their so-called project.
I'm definitely picking up that fans are unhappy.
Disconnect. We're seeing it with the protest at the weekend. You're seeing it on a regular match basis. You're seeing it online. You're seeing it, when the supporters trust are talking. Fairly balanced, you'll know them. Fairly balanced Chelsea fans are disaffected with the way their club is being run. Some of them hark back to Roman Abramovich and his ownership. We know all about the sanctions and the issues there. But actually, he was engaged in the club. He was interested in the football. He was the fans sing his name, and the fans chant his name basically as two fingers to the two men in the boardroom who they feel have lost the connection with the fans. And you see it in little things like the Americanization, the plasticization, as one of the fans call it, with events. We're seeing it, okay, it's a Premier League-wide issue. And it is an absolute concern. You see it with little things like the fans want to celebrate a goal and suddenly you've got loud music played over their goal celebration when it should be about the fans and that engagement, that connection with the players. You've been in the boardroom. Why are these highly successful, clearly intelligent individuals like the two at the top of Chelsea are just actually a little bit naive that they don't have this connection with the fans, and they actually not dismissive of the connection because they must be intelligent enough to realise how important it is to have the fans on side, and actually be a little bit more measured on ticket pricing, which is something that might be appearing over the horizon for Chelsea, and having actually a proper connection with what they might perceive as legacy fans, rather than the tourists who may come into the club but will actually leave when the results downturn again.
Well, I think the point really of my explosive cocktail, when you combine private equity, ultra financially driven ownership with football, it's just a dangerous mix. Because you're right. I've always said to you, you have to be a certifiable idiot as a football club chief executive to not start with your fans, listen to those fans, reward loyalty, and understand these are not just commercial enterprises. That's the basic bottom line.
Do they understand that?
I don't think that is something. I think it takes a long time, and I've sat through seeing, Hicks and Gillette's demise. I think Fenway would admit to me that they found the first few years very difficult. I obviously had an American owner at Villa. I do think that American sports is more unequivocally commercially led, and everyone gets it. And the community aspect and the non-commercial element of English football in particular takes time for Americans to understand. And even when they understand it, they don't like it, because it is anathema to a commercially driven American sports investor to be told, look, obviously we've got 20,000 people who want to get into the stadium, which means on any sort of demand curve, we can increase prices. To have a CEO like me say, yes, but you're going to alienate your core supporters.
And what does it do to the atmosphere? If I'm running Sky TV or TNT or whoever's showing the Premier League, I want atmosphere. But look, we need to move it on. What is the future for Chelsea Football Club?
Well, another private equity phrase that I'm sure will loom large in the minds of Iqbali and Bowley right now is 4 years in. With this looming cliff that I've described to you, I'm quite sure, purely on the compliance with the rules side of the equation, leaving aside, nobody likes losing huge amounts of money, is it the moment for something called a mid-course correction? Do they change tack? And
we are on the bridge.
And I think we are literally on the bridge at the bridge, and the captain of the ship can see definitely very choppy waters ahead.
And you've got two captains
in complying with those rules next season. So whether they like it or not, I do believe this summer they are going to have to entertain major sales of players for profit just to buttress next year's position. I am assuming they miss top 5, and I may be wrong on that. And there's plenty still to play for. But if they miss top 5 and miss the Champions League, I think next year's figures look naughty, and this is the summer where they
and
get to
their
correct
main
that.
assets are someone like Cole Palmer. I mean, that would just be devastating for Chelsea fans if you lost a player like him.
It just would be it would be.
Is that the end of their project if they start selling good young players?
It would be emblematic of the flaw in the project, that this notion that it's just stable, consistent progress. You buy them all young, they age together, and you get a brilliant team. No, if the rules kick in and on-field results don't quite go to plan and you need to sell your best player just to be able to comply with the rules, then guess what? You're right back to square one, and then you're in year 5. And I respectfully would suggest, Cole would be, Cole was a very, very clever purchase.
Yeah.
I think they paid about 40 million. Yeah. So he's an obvious potential. I shudder to mention Esteval. Maybe that's further down the line. But the basic issue is of a trading model. Yeah. You have to sell your best players for profit to meet, A, the compliance requirements, and B, to fund the losses. Because the underlying position is this club just lost £260 million. Its costs are here for the duration. They're not going away. And yes, I'm sure they would say, look, we've now got a brilliant new commercial team. We expect to see a dramatic increase in commercial income. Long term, we're going to build a new stadium.
Oh, come on, tell me about the stadium. How do you build a stadium? Where do you find the land in London? Is the feeling that actually they're going to have to bite the bullet and build on Stamford Bridge, which is going to be fun with the local residents, who I imagine some of them will get lawyered up because it'll be a long-term development? Because I don't quite see where they can find a site within, say, like 3-4 miles. I mean, people talk about Earl's Court. Whenever you write about Earl's Court, you get messages from people back saying that's not going to happen. Obviously, the Battersea, what we call it, the Battersea Drogs Home, which we thought was going to be built there in the Drogba era, that obviously development has been taken over.
All I'll say on Stadium, Henry, is that it's miles away. Okay, we're talking about a cliff edge on their FFP compliance next year.
Just to finish the stadium point, you think that if it gets built sometime down the line, it will be on the current Stamford Bridge site?
That would be my guess.
Yeah, because of CPO and a few other options.
But, the knockdown is amazingly problematic.
Yeah.
Twickenham wouldn't have Chelsea. Wembley's a hell of a schlep for 3, 4, 5 years for current fans. The project is fraught with complexity, difficulty, so easy to shelve.
He's got a train track on one side, he's got a cemetery on the other. I think the Stoll mentions that they've addressed that. Anyway, it's complicated. Yeah. Let's move on.
Okay, so mid-course correction. Yep. We have talked about the fact that we think that the over-reliance on young player strategy is not translating into Champions League qualification, let alone or Premier League titles. Do they change course there? Where would you be looking if that was the plan?
Well, they have to, because you need someone experienced to take 11 kids across the road. Otherwise, it's a risk. So clearly they're going to have to change strategy there. There are inklings or suggestions that they are going to bring a little bit more experience into it.
On the
they need
side.
A new goalkeeper. They need an experienced centre-half. They haven't effectively replaced Thiago Silva emotionally and also as a defender. And they need a centre-forward. And those three don't come cheap.
They don't come cheap. And those purchases, if you're right, and I sense you're right on that, then you're looking at selling to buy, because the numbers don't work unless those purchases are funded by maybe some very good young players being sold for some very big numbers, and that will not be welcome to many Chelsea listeners. But it simply doesn't work, and doing nothing definitely doesn't work. I think the area where I would be focusing my mid-course correction would be in the coaching and manager department, and maybe in the sporting director function as well. I think they're interrelated. But firstly, you don't think any of the so-called big beasts would want to work in an environment where they have much less control over playing resources. I think you're right.
History shows that.
It does. And I think history also shows that that isn't the profile they want. So I asked myself, coming on here this morning, what would be a hybrid? Where could you find somebody who probably is up and coming, younger, who
connection with the club,
who would up and coming in the sense that might be willing to work within that structure, within reason. Somebody like an Arteta when he went to Arsenal, that profile, has a connection, looks like being, has the potential to be a great coach, connection to the club, but would have heavyweight authority with the players.
Who's out there then?
To me, the name that stands out is Fabregas at Como.
Right,
I've been watching Serie A very closely this season. It's absolutely remarkable. They're currently 5th in the league. They've still, top 4 gets you Champions League. They're still in that fight. They had a incredible 4-3 defeat to Inter, who are now running away with Serie A at the weekend. If Como had won that, they'd have been in even better shape. But for a young manager in a tiny club, albeit bankrolled by an unbelievably rich Indonesian, but nevertheless, I think he's won Coach of the Year in Serie A. So and it's no surprise. I worked with him at Chelsea, always a highly intelligent, thoughtful footballer who I felt was absolutely destined to be a coach and a manager.
But if you're saying he's highly intelligent and thoughtful, completely agree. I've talked to him at Arsenal. Won't he actually look at the structure and go, I'm walking into a trap?
He definitely want to get some clarity on who does what to whom and
But that's a philosophical thing as well as changing sporting directors. They have to change the approach of the club.
Yeah, I think that it isn't black and white. It's grey. There's definitely an issue there. But let's come back to this model, okay, to powerful, financially driven owners. They're now, by my maths, £4.5 billion in on Chelsea. Yeah. £4.5 billion to get their money back. Maybe 1.3 billion of debt ahead of them that has to be paid off before they make a penny, get their money back. So this is a really massive investment that is behind plan. Okay, there's no debating that. It's definitely not where they wanted it to be. And they've gone really so extreme, I think, in hiring such a raw and inexperienced coach. That's my opinion. Everybody likes him and, I wish him well. But for Chelsea Football Club, £4.4 billion investment, needing to dominate on the field to make the numbers work, I think they've underspecified the coach. They're going to have to make compromises at every level to their model. And if that model is having sporting directors telling the coach what to do, they're going to have to modify that model.
Would they sell?
What, sell the whole club?
Yeah.
Well, as I've explained right up top, a private equity firm normally has 10 years of ownership before they're required to sell.
But everything you've told me today and talked so eloquently about is about the issues, the problems that they've got and the fact that they are... It looks slightly bleak, as you're saying, in 18 months' time. If someone came in now, if a wealthy, Qatari or Saudi came in now, you're saying they wouldn't sell because they take the longer-term view and they're prepared to go through some choppy waters?
I don't see it. Again, the nature of the financial investment business is that you sell at the top. And that means you sell when your plans are going well, when you've made your business more valuable than when you bought it. We're right now at the moment of peak uncertainty. We're talking about the need to make some corrections to their strategy, slightly shift to the player recruitment plan, maybe go back in on a more experienced manager, maybe make some changes in the boardroom behind the scenes to strengthen management more generally. We call that digging in. They got to dig in for the long haul now. They probably need to resolve their differences because I can't imagine that's helping anybody. I've been in Liverpool and I arrived at Liverpool. You've got, imagine what you're like, let's say you're in the finance department and owner A rings you and says, I need the numbers. And then 10 minutes later, owner B rings you and says, I heard you spoke to owner A. What you doing? It's totally dysfunctional to have owners where everyone in the building wonders whether they're getting along and wonders how to behave. So they need to resolve that one way or another. I don't think, by the way, that's going to result in either of them buying each other out anytime soon, because I think the numbers are just now so big. So they need to resolve those issues good and proper, have a jolly good review of their plan, look at some mid-course correction, and dig in for the next 2 to 3 years to get back on track where the metric of success, I say this in every episode to you, Henry, ultimately is they're fighting not just to scrape into 5th place where we get a bit lucky on a coefficient. They're fighting top 2, top 3 in the Premier League every year. That's what Chelsea's been doing since...
That team's miles off that.
and they're going deep in the Champions League, and they're not even in the Champions League, and they're miles off it. So this is not a minor course correction. They need to make major changes to their approach, and right now, I'm afraid they are miles off it.
Yeah, and the moral in all this is respect the game, respect the issues that can come with buying a football club, which I simply don't think they've done. I think they're being slightly naive. The disconnect with the fans, the project, whether it's with the coaches, whether it's with the players, they've been spectacularly naive. They haven't been well advised. I find it extraordinary. And I think there will be very few tears shed for them if it does result in them making a terrible loss and going out of town with their tails between their legs. And I think there's a moral for other owners coming into football. Do you think they'll succeed?
Well, I've been struck by how many people in the last 2-3 years have given the benefit of doubt. The Baldrick, there's a cunning plan here. And I think that's because, to be really clear, they are from the world I used to be in. What Todd Bowley's reputation is absolutely huge.
They're
for
used
what
to
he's
success,
achieved.
but they're not looking at a success here.
Yeah, I think what he did with the Dodgers is indisputable. And, Bedad runs one of the most elite private equity firms in the world, $90 billion of assets, huge returns for their investors. He's got a load of credit in the bank. This is where I'd like to finish, actually. He's got a load of credit in the bank in his world, okay? His investment fund, he's made his investors loads of money for a very long time. Yeah, he has strayed away from that to own a football club in London, backing this genius Todd Bowley. Well, he clearly felt 6 months in it wasn't going to plan. He finds himself now stepping in and being in the boardroom at Chelsea, on the phone with 2 agents in a transfer window, delivering record losses, finishing outside the Champions League places, being criticised by people like you, by the fans, by everybody. That isn't sustainable for the head of a private equity firm based in Santa Monica, California. He's got to fix that underlying issue. He didn't sign on to be the de facto, day-to-day CEO of that football club. That's what they've got to address.
So appoint someone elite for that role.
He needs elite management on and off the
CP,
field.
you available?
No, I'm well and truly retired. But that's what I'd do if I were him. I've run a private equity firm, SPF, strategy, people, finances. Get the people right. I don't think they have.
Well, without the SPF, they're going to get burnt.
Exactly right. Listen, we'll watch closely. I'm sure they fancy themselves for a late season run. And in the meantime, we hope you've enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next week.